morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Stacey Varghese, and I'm the Director of Leadership Giving and Engagement at St. John's University. Today, we have Romanella and Nicole O'Neill, who will discuss how to be a balanced leader. Some housekeeping rules before we begin. If you have a question, please submit it on the bottom right in the Q&A section to panelists and hosts, and they will be answered throughout the fireside. As a reminder, please make sure to keep yourself on mute. Lastly, a recording of today's session will be emailed to you after the presentation. Now, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Romanella is founder, president, and CEO of 360 Management Services, LLC, and author of the book, Tighten the Lug Nuts. 360 Management Services is a complete management services company with seasoned professionals focused on thought leadership, leadership development, and process improvement. Prior to this, Rocky served as CEO and director of Unitech Global Services, a provider of engineering, construction management, and installation services to companies specializing in the telecommunications field. Rocky also completed a 36-year career at UPS, where he served as president and general manager of UPS Supply Chain Solutions. Rocky has a bachelor's degree in executive management from St. John's University. He is also a two-time winner of the UPS Chairman's Award for Excellence and has received 2 prestigious certifications from Columbia University School of Business and Michigan State University. Nicole O'Neill is a 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer for New York's very own WPIX-11, The Today Show, and The Dr. Oz Show, with a decade of experience at both programs. She started her television career as a production assistant at Live with Regis and Kelly, and is currently a producer at WPIX-11 Morning News in New York City. Welcome, Rocky and Nicole. I will hand the webinar controls over to you now.
Good morning. So I will start as the moderator. Like Stacey said, my name is Nicole, and I'm going to be conducting the interview. I've spent a lot of time writing interviews for talent, so I'm just going to, be the moderator of this interview. And in the interest of full disclosure, Rocky is my dad, which is why I got picked for this role. So I think it's great that he's talking to everyone today. I think, you all came on for this topic of balanced leadership. So right now and throughout the talk, I would love it if you could just write in the chat a little bit why you're here, what you do, and what you're looking to get out of this hour, because I think that would be really good if Rocky can answer specific questions for you. So let's get started. So Rocky, why don't you've had a long tenure, Stacey went through your decorated resume, why don't you give us a quick synopsis of your career?
Well, thank you, Nicole. Just bring your dad to work day today, I guess, huh? So we're going to start off with, so for me, I started out going to college to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach, with never any thought of having the career that I ended up having. I was working part-time to work my way through school at UPS, and St. John's University in Staten Island gave me the opportunity to work part-time and also go to college. It was a great experience, a wonderful campus, and I met my beautiful wife, Debbie, there as well. So it was just a great experience for me. As I was working my way through school, UPS had a promotion from within policy. And what I started to recognize is that the best leaders were those people who could get their people to connect the dots. They were the individuals who were really teaching and coaching as leaders. So for me, as I changed my major, I never gave up my passion to be a teacher or coach. I just did it in a different setting. I did it in a business setting. So as I worked my way through UPS and took advantage of the promotion from within policy, 3 things always stuck in my mind. And the 3 things are the 3 things my dad taught me and told me before I started my job at UPS. The first thing he told me was, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you. Then he said to me, hey, learn your job and learn some more. And just remember, it's what you do when no one's watching that counts. And those 3 stuck with me. And quickly, why they were so important was, what I realized is as I was getting tapped on the shoulder for new assignments inside of UPS, and I had some wonderful opportunities inside UPS. For example, we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, and rebranded to the UPS store. I had that as a direct report and made that recommendation. Later on, we purchased companies and built UPS Supply Chain Solutions. And I had that opportunity to run this side of the world. And actually, as I look in today's world and what's going on, it's with great joy that I see UPS doing such a wonderful job in the healthcare side of things, just with the distribution of the vaccine, and knowing that I was the person who kind of led that entry into healthcare really makes me proud as a UPSer, and I get a chance to see it unfold years later. But when he said to me, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you, what I learned and what I think becomes a valuable teaching lesson for me and a leadership lesson was, you have to believe in your people often until they're ready to believe in themselves. I may not have always felt ready. I may not have had the confidence, but all I could hear my dad saying, hey, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you. And so what happened was UPS believed in me until I was ready to believe in myself. And as leaders, you often have to believe in your people until they're ready to believe in themselves. And they kind of get to that point where their confidence and their knowledge is kind of at that break-even point. And then once they really know their job, you step back and you let them fly. And of course, when he said to me, learn your job and learn some more, you're always on that continuous education. All of you that are on the call today, all of you that have listened to the many webinars that Stacy's put together, you're a lifelong learner. I think that's so important. And finally, when he said to me, it's what you do when no one's watching that counts. Obviously, as a 19-year-old, because I started at UPS right out of high school, as a 19-year-old, I'm like, Dad, you just ruined the best part of this. No one's watching. And he always said to me, there's always two people watching, the man upstairs and the person looking in the mirror. And I think it's always important for you to be able to look in the mirror. And you may not achieve everything you're hoping to achieve, but you got to know that you did the best job you could.
So one thing that you're going to learn throughout this call is that what he did was he was basically the first person to pitch the idea that UPS would deliver pharmaceuticals. And so today, now that UPS is distributing the vaccine with FedEx, it's monumental. So what I would love for him to explain to everybody is how you went from loading packages, a part-time job in a warehouse, to becoming the person that was basically the president leading the charge in distributing pharmaceuticals.
Well, I think what happened is I had those three, core values, instilled in me by my dad, and they were always there. And so when UPS tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, we want you to, like I said, rebrand the MBE to the UPS store, or in this case, supply chain. The thing that I learned from my early days at UPS is, so before you became a full-time supervisor at UPS, you became a driver. And so I was a UPS driver in Plainfield, New Jersey. I loved the job. And so, but what it taught me was that you really need to understand the job from the grassroots, right? So I loaded trailers, unloaded trailers, delivered the packages. And so every new job I received at UPS, and even later on when I became CEO at Unitech, the first thing I always did is, so for example, we buy mailbox, et cetera. The first thing I do is put an apron on and go work in a store. When we got into the supply chain side of the world, I went in and started picking orders, understanding how orders dropped in a warehouse. And what I realized is that when you look at the different types of work that we did at UPS, we were doing, distribution of high tech, computers. We were doing retail, Gap, and some of those were some of our largest customers. But the thing I noticed was in healthcare, what we were as a company, we were a compliant company, we were a caring company, and it was an aging population. And so for me, healthcare was a natural place for us to be inside of UPS. And so what I did is I took the time to understand the healthcare side of the world. Now, I wasn't an expert, but we had some really good people in our organization. And so what happened was I learned it as best I could from them, and realized that would be an excellent opportunity for UPS because of our core values as an organization: compliant, caring, and it was an opportunity for us to do good things.
So talk about so you educated yourself before you, let's say, essentially pitch this idea to your bosses, which so many of us have opportunities to pitch to our bosses, and that fear sets in, that idea like, what if I'm wrong? So take us back to the moment when you had to pitch to a large room of people, we should get into healthcare, and I'm not going to look at my packages as packages, I'm going to look at them as patients. Walk us through that moment.
Well, as you know, I have a balanced leadership concept of customers, people, shareholder, stakeholders. But the final thing that I think is so important is to answer that question of, hey, if this was my business, if this was my candy store, would I do it? And so as I go through the decision-making process, where I kind of lay things out and understand, how do we handle this from a customer perspective? How do we handle this from a people perspective. When you think about the people perspective, it's the training, it's the education that you give your people. Do they understand why it's important for us to do this? Then, of course, it's your shareholder stakeholders. Is it profitable? But then the last question you always ask yourself is, if this was my business, if I was writing the check from the Romanella checkbook, would I do it? And then once I got to that point where my answer was, yes, I would. If this was my business and I would write the check, well, then when I walk into that meeting, I have all my ducks in a row when it comes to, okay, here's our customers, here's how they're represented, this is why it fits in our portfolio, this is why it's important for us to do it. That makes sense. Here's our people, here's how we'll train them, here's how we'll make sure that they understand that these aren't packages, these are patients to us now. That we have to have a line of sight with the customer, with a patient at the other end, so that when we're picking the orders, 99% on time isn't good anymore because you don't want to be that one patient that doesn't get your pharma product. And of course, from a profitability point of view, yeah, it's a good product for us. It fits in a portfolio. Our people understand it, and we can make money on it. But then the last question is always, if this was my candy store, would I do it? And it's interesting, Nicole, because I've changed that now to the person at the other end. So when someone brings me a new idea and says to me, hey, I think this is what we should do next, I listen intently. I make sure that all three constituents are represented. But then I always ask them the question, hey, if this was your candy store, would you do it? And about 80% of the time, people say yes. But it's interesting, 20% of the time, you do get people who say, hey, if it was my store, I wouldn't write that check. And I look at them and I say, well, you're asking us as an organization or asking me to make a decision to do this. And they would say to me, well, you asked us to find a new revenue stream. You said we need new products. You said, we've got to take the company in a different direction. So I'm giving you an idea, but I'm not sure it's the right idea or I would do it. The opposite happens sometimes, too, where someone will have an idea and I'm thinking, well, I'm okay with it. I'm not as excited about it as they are, but they are. They said that they would write that check out of their personal checking account. We're going to do this because they're so committed. So to me, it's that final question that I ask myself. Then I ask others who bring me, hey, if this was your candy store, would you write that check? And I think that's the powerful last step before you walk into your boss or your superior or that person you're making the pitch to. Hey, if this was my business, if this was my radio station, if this was my TV station, this would be the show I'd go with.
And so a lot of people on this call probably are in situations where they have this opportunity to take themselves to the next level by just stepping up in a meeting and speaking up. You were obviously a leader in your career, which we'll get to, a leader that was very empathetic and very open to listening. Not everybody has a boss or a leader in their life like you. So how do you push past the fear of the thought that you may be making the wrong decision and you may be putting yourself in a vulnerable position? How do you push back past the fear to continue to make bold decisions and establish yourself as a leader?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is really understand that person you're working for. What you may find out is that what they lack is self-confidence. And the way that they mask that self-confidence, the lack of their own self-confidence, is by saying no all the time, or, I would hear all the time, I work for someone who used to say to me all the time, hey, smarter people than you thought it was a good idea. And you would, and then it's sometimes they'll say that in the most inappropriate time, or they'll embarrass you. And what you do is you work through that and you say, okay, well, all right, I understand, but why is he saying that? Why is he feeling that way? Why is she feeling that way? I think they care about the company. I think they want to make good decisions, but they just can't see it. And so I think what you have to do then is understand where they're coming from. So some of the most difficulties you have as a leader is managing up. I know we talk a lot about managing the people in your care. I never say people work for me, or you should never say people work for you. They're people in your care. So the people in your care that you're managing, they're sometimes the easiest people to work for, right? If you communicate properly and you show them the vision of what you're trying to accomplish. Managing up can be sometimes the most difficult because they may view you as a threat. They may not have the confidence to handle what you're. So I think it's important to understand that person that you're making that pitch to. And I think that that's what's so important. And then I think once they see the courage of your conviction, once they see that you're willing to write that check out of your own personal checking account, I think that's what changes the dynamic a little bit.
Great. So now let's move on to leadership, this idea of balanced leadership, a term that you coined. So, you ended your career at UPS, you went on to CEO another company, and then you chose to write a book. So you could have spoken about anything. You could have spoken about supply chain solution. You could have spoken about franchise rebranding. Why did you choose to speak about leadership and that be the thing you hope that your legacy would be about?
Well, for me, we're all leaders at one time or another. I think we get too caught up on this term leadership, meaning it's a title. Hey, I'm the president or I'm the manager or whatever that title is. Leadership's not about a title. Leadership's about your ability to motivate, inspire, and your ability to make a difference, right? Do you leave things a little better than you found them? Are people better because of their time with you? And I think sometimes we get caught up in that. We're all leaders at one time or another, whether we're managing the Little League team or the soccer team or the dance team or cheerleading squad, or just in our own family lives. I mean, people often say to me, I'm not a leader, I'm an individual contributor. Well, sometimes the individual contributor in your organization is the most important leader. The wise old saying, that person who's sitting there, been there for 30-something years, and everybody goes to them. Everybody walks over to them and says, hey, how do we do this? Why do we do it this way? And they make that difference in someone's life. Leadership and legacy is all about, did I make a difference? Did I leave something a little better than I found it? And for me, as I've gone through my career, I've always felt like so many good people don't get the recognition they deserve because they didn't have the title of CEO or title of manager, but they made some of the most impactful things inside your organization. So I think that we're all leaders at one time or another, and I think leadership is somewhat of a misunderstood concept. We're all leaders at one time or another. We all make a difference in people's lives. I always say that quickly. I always say that if I was in a room right now with 400 people giving a keynote speech, and I said, hey, who's your state senator, or who's in charge of your board of ed? Most people couldn't answer that question. But if I said, hey, who's that teacher that made a difference in your life? Everybody stops, tilts their head. Oh, Miss So-and-so, 6th grade. Mr. So-and-so in 5th grade. Well, by that extension, they're leaders because they made a difference. They left things a little better than they found them.
That's great. Now, before we move on to more specifics about balanced leadership and how you can achieve balanced leadership in your own life or in your own career, I think one thing that really would help people on this call understand who you are, I think a lot of times we all come to these seminars for an aha moment. We're looking for something. We're looking for something more. I think you should just quickly tell the story about your aha moment and tell us about why you have Milton Hershey's book behind you.
My aha moment. So as a kid growing up in Jersey, our vacation was to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And in those days, you actually walked through the Hershey factory and saw them making the chocolate. And it was the coolest thing as a kid. Everybody's walking around with their hairnets on and they're making chocolate right in front of your very eyes. And so as a kid, it was such a great experience and something I thoroughly enjoyed. Later on, though, as I was managing large operations inside of UPS, I'm walking around one of my operations one day and I stopped and I thought, wow, think of the confidence that Hershey had to have in their people that any customer is walking through at any time and can see them making the chocolate. And I thought to myself, you know what, could a customer walk through my operation and ship a package again? Would they ever ship another package with UPS again if they saw how I ran my operations? And for me, that was my aha moment, that I had to run my Hershey factory. The way that Hershey factory was under glass and a customer could walk in at any time, I needed to run my operation as if a customer could walk in any time and see that their package was being taken care of, and that we were treating that package as something special, that we were acting as that was our only package inside our organization. And so that was my aha moment. And from that moment forward, I always challenged my people. Whenever I went to a new operation, I'd write them a letter about my Hershey story, and then I'd give them a Hershey bar and say, here's for your energy to build your own Hershey factory and have that kind of operation that your customers can walk in any time and they'd still want to do business with us again.
Great. And so to have that, crystal clear hub like you talked about, you knew that you need balanced leadership. So walk us through what balanced leadership is and how you've defined it.
Well, balance is important in everything you do in life, right? If you're extremes on either side, you start to get yourself in trouble, right? So for me, as I was making decisions and I was growing inside of UPS, I realized that we were either, swinging from one side to another. It was either always about production or performance, or it was about cost savings, or all of a sudden, we got a bad employee relations index. Oh, it's about our people now. Let's make sure we take care of all of our people. And so you're swinging side to side, and it's very disruptive not only to your business, but it's disruptive to all your people. And so what I realized is that as I was making decisions, I needed to keep them in balance, that there was three key constituents: your customers, your people, your shareholders, and stakeholders. And so as people would bring me an idea or a decision, I would listen intently and to make sure that all three constituents were represented. So, for example, someone brought a new product or service. Well, the customer was clearly represented, the sales force and the management team and the marketing team did a great job articulating why it's a good product, why it should be in the portfolio, and how it sits in our portfolio. Of course, the CFO, he or she's banging on a calculator. Oh, at that price point, at this number of units, we can really make a profit. And then before we would go, before they would say, okay, we're ready to make a decision, I'd say, well, let's stop. How about our people? They're not represented in this decision. What training do they need? Do they understand why it's important? How do they handle a service disconnect? I would make sure that all three constituents. So that gave me balance. Now, there are times when one may lead more than the other, depending on the decision. But to me, it's always important in all you do that there's balance and that all three of these constituents, your customers, your people, shareholders, stakeholders, are represented in your decision-making process. And if you do, you'll make much better decisions and they'll be in a much more balanced form.
So we're going to get to decision making a little later on in the hour because, as we all know, that's really important in leadership. But I want to talk about one of the ideas in balanced leadership, and you touched on it a little bit, and I think we all see this a lot right now. Things get out of balance when we overcorrect, when our boss overcorrects, when politicians overcorrect. So in your career, you've seen a lot of overcorrections. Like, what do you know about overcorrections, and how do you kind of feel like, is it helpful? Is it harmful? Like, how do you put a stop to that?
Well, I think it's very harmful, and I think what ends up happening is, because if you think about it, there's three types of people in an organization. Take it from a people perspective, because they're your greatest asset in an organization. So your early adopters, right, those are the 20% of people that they're just sitting there at the edge of their seat, and they're going to early adopt. And so when you're overcorrecting or you're doing these different, coming up with new ideas all the time, they become like pinballs because they can't wait to be the early adopter, right? Then you got 20% of the people who sit on the fence and say, you know what, I'm going to come up with another idea, just sit tight, we're not doing anything. It's the people in the middle that you lose, that 60% that they're not sure what to do. And that's what happens with extremes. We were talking about this whole concept today about, distance learning and virtual learning. Well, I think the extremes of us all going into an office every single day will probably never get back to that. But I'm not sure the extremes of us never going into an office is healthy either. And I think what will happen is the correction will be some hybrid where we understand that there is appropriate time for us to be in an office. We're going to need to have some camaraderie. We're going to need to feel like we're part of the team, but we just don't need to be in an office every single day. And I think that's what ends up happening. But what happens is when you correct or have extremes, you lose people. You may lose the early adopters. You may lose those people on the fence, and certainly the people who aren't going to do anything and wait you out. They're clearly not participating in helping your organization. So I think it's important to make sure that, you understand what are the unintended consequences. You try to find out what are the unintended consequences of what you're trying to accomplish.
And I think it's this idea that a lot of leaders create in chaos. You touched on that, this idea that people come in, they have a great idea, but like you said, they had a great idea yesterday and it just sent everybody scattering. But one thing I want to really pull out in that answer was the 60% of people in the middle, because I think a lot of us get stuck there because we are the diligent employees, because we are the ones that put our head down and we never make a scene. Sometimes these are the employees that get taken advantage of, and they don't make it to the next level because they're not the early adopters. Do you think that is okay to be somebody in the middle? And how do you get out of the middle and get to that top 20%, but you don't lose your integrity and lose your sense of self?
Well, I think that if you think about it, they're the most important people inside the organization, right? Because they're making things happen on a daily basis, right? The early adopters are great, and you always need people that are going to, early adopt and be excited about it. The 20% that aren't going to do anything, just leave them on the side for a second, because what you're doing is you're managing to that exception when you really are losing the 60% of the people in the middle who, if they start to feel like they're part of something, right? That's why in that balanced leadership approach, it's, if you think about it, customers should always be represented. And we talk about customers a lot. We talk about profitability all the time. But it's the people that are your greatest asset in an organization. And if you lose the 60% of those people, you lose the core of your business. And so I think it's so important to understand who is in that 60% and what motivates them. What are the things that make them feel like they're part of something special? And I think that's what's so important, is that you understand that group of people and you try as hard as you can to get them to feel like they're part of the group. They feel like they're part of the organization. Now, it doesn't mean that they lose their individuality, because that's the biggest fallacy in team building. Oh, that we're all going to be the same. No, absolutely not. The key to a great team is everyone gets to be an individual. That's what makes franchising so great. That's what I loved about being part of the UPS Store Network and the wonderful franchisees I met. You want them to be individual entrepreneurs within the confines of a great organization. So that's the trick. How do I allow you to be an entrepreneur? How do I allow you to feel good about yourself? Well, how do I allow you to feel like you're still an individual? You're still Nicole O'Neill with your personality, with your style, but you're working within what we're trying to accomplish inside the organization. And I think that's what's important. And that's a trick that a lot of leaders struggle with, right? Because if I let you be too much of an individual, you may go too far one way and now you're destructive. So I got to make sure that you're not destructive or get lost. But if I can get that 60% motivated, feeling like they're part of something special, and what they do matters, that's the trick in an organization. Because now you got 80% of your people participating.
Well, and I think what's interesting is you just described being a leader that empowers the people that are in your care, whereas there's a lot of leaders that surround themselves with weaker people. So talk about the importance of being a leader who surrounds themselves with powerful people, almost people that, may be smarter than them in some aspects. I think that that's an amazing quality that you've had as a leader, to surround yourself with people that do a really good job at their job and you're not intimidated by them.
Well, first it starts with, so the number one thing I know is what I don't know. And the things I don't know, I'm not afraid to ask for help on. So, I know that there's things that I'm really good at, but there's things that, I understand accounting, I understand finance, but you know what? Nothing's better than having a great CFO where he or she really understands, finance as the language of the business and can be helpful. Do I understand it? Of course I do. You couldn't get to the places you are without it. But you need to understand the things you don't know and never be afraid to ask. That's not a sign for help. That's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of strength. That's a sign of a confident leader who says, look, this is where I'm really good. This is where I'll participate. This is where I can really add some really value. But you know what? You're really good at this. I need your help with this. Can you help us? What are you thinking? Some of the, I think about our days at UPS years ago. The driver does the job every single day, the service provider. They're the person when you want to change a route. You don't sit in an office and get a map and redesign everything. No, you go to the person who does the job every single day and you say to them, how do you think we should do this? How do we lay this route out? Just think about it. 85, 90% of people, they don't get up in the morning and say, you know what, I want to go do a bad job today. No, most people want to go in, get their job done, and do it well. It's we put up all the barriers as the leadership people who then get them all. We come up with new rules. We come up with new processes. We think this is a good idea. They're doing it every day. So I think that your ability to engage with people is so important. And it starts with you not being afraid to ask for help or ask for their opinions and not be afraid to engage with them. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
That's great. I heard an interview where Mark Cuban said the exact same thing, that he surrounds himself with people that he considers smarter than him, which is just something really interesting to hear from someone like Mark Cuban. Okay, so why don't you talk to everybody about the term that you coined, tighten the lug nuts. Tell us the story about where that concept came about and how it's basically shaped the decisions you make every single day.
Well, simply, when lug nuts are loose on a vehicle, there's a story in the book, and I'll let you guys read the story. I won't give you too much of the story, but at the end of the day, if you think about it, when the lug nuts are loose on a vehicle, they're important. You could simply walk over and tighten them, and within 5 minutes, have taken care of a problem. But you get distracted. Other things come up, and so what happens is now you're working on something else, and a few days later, you realize that the front wheel is loose, and now you've got a much bigger problem, and everything has to stop. And so now I have to focus in on the loose wheel. Well, what was important yesterday that you could have simply fixed becomes urgent today. And as a leader and as a person in your personal lives, whether it's business or personal life, you can only juggle so many urgent things. So tighten the lug nuts. Don't allow important things to become urgent. And you can think of those things, whether it's an email that you get, that you could have responded to quickly, but you get sidetracked and you don't. And then 2 days later, someone's calling you saying, stop everything. Now we've got to take care of it. And then when that happens, it used to drive me crazy. People will be like, I can't believe it. I've got no luck. Nothing ever goes my way. Now I'm taking off a plan. And you're looking at them like, you should just tighten the lug nuts. You could have tightened that lug nut and you would have never had gotten in this position. So the whole concept is don't allow important things to become urgent. Tighten the lug nuts.
And as much as I would love people to buy your book, I would love it if you could give the specific story of when you walked in and saw a loose lug nut on a UPS truck and what happened.
Well, it was interesting. I was walking, and I loved to go in the morning. And when we were in Southern California living at the time, we moved 9 times with UPS across the country. So we're living in Southern California. I'm the district manager, and I was walking out to find the automotive supervisor to help me with another specific problem. And as I'm walking, we're trained to look at different things as part of the pre-trip of the vehicle, is the gas cap on, all these different things. And I noticed that there were some loose lug nuts on that vehicle. And so I walked over, and sure enough, they were a little bit loose. So I saw the automotive supervisor. I said to him, hey, you know what? Before we start on this next thing I need you to do, you got some loose lug nuts on that line over there. Oh, okay, what's up? I go, hey, look, I got a really important job for you. You're the guy. I think you can make this thing happen. Of course, he's excited. I'm the district manager. This is like a career thing for him. So he's all pumped up. He said, all right, I'll take care of it. I go, look, whatever help you need from me, you got my support. Let's make it happen. I said, I'll come back and see you in a couple days. So sure enough, I go back a couple days later. I'm looking for him. I said to one of his peer supervisors, hey, where's so-and-so? He's in the office. He's got a major problem. He's got a vehicle. Driver thinks the front wheel is loose. I'm looking. He's all discombobulated. I said, what are you doing? He said, you can't believe it. I got no luck. The driver feels like the front wheel. I go, was that the vehicle I told you about? He said, yeah. I go, why don't you just tighten the lug nuts? He goes, well, I knew I was going to go do it, but then he told me he had this most important thing, and this was such a big opportunity for me. I said, okay, but the lesson is don't allow important things to become urgent. You could have just tightened the lug nuts. Before I even got back to my office, those lug nuts could have been tightened. So that stuck with me because he was such a good person. And it was one of those where his strength became his weakness, right? He was so excited about doing it, doing this assignment, doing it well, and pleasing the organization, pleasing me, that he ended up getting himself in more trouble. And so thankfully nothing happened and nobody got hurt or anything like that. But the point was, it was something simple as tightening the lug nuts or just taking care of something that was important at that time, that when it became urgent, changed his whole day, and now he started to get behind in other urgent things he was working on, ironically.
Can you give us some examples of other times you're out and about now and you see loose lug nuts? Like I remember a time we were eating at a restaurant and everybody knew it was like the opening day of summer, and we got to the restaurant that morning and they were short-staffed. And you said, they should have just tightened the lug nuts and prepared for this influx of people. So you see it all the time where people let important things become urgent.
Yeah, it's just interesting. And the thing that drives me crazy about that is then the answer they give you, right? So how about when they say, well, we're really busy tonight. And you're thinking, well, when you started this, weren't you hoping you would be busy? You're not excited that you have more customers. And it's those simple things like that, where you have this opportunity to do things, but you're so excited about doing something that you forget the little details. You forget, as you said, those loose lug nuts. Did you order enough food in a restaurant, or when you're thinking about preparing something, or you're thinking about starting out on a trip? I mean, who leaves on a trip and doesn't check whether there's enough fuel in the car? But how many times you're into the drive and 45 minutes later you're pulling over to get gas and you're like, I was in the car 2 hours before we started. I could have got gas then, but now I'm stopping. So it's those little things like that where you're running around. You're like an hour into the trip and the lights off, and the kids are screaming, got the lights off. We're gonna run out of gas. And you're like, that's something as simple as that. Not to use just automobile analogies, but the point is it's those important things that you don't take care of when you can take care of them that now become urgent, and it really just sends you as the person in charge or the leader at that moment or the individual into a tailspin almost, and it changes your whole day and it changes your whole routine.
And I think it's so important for a leader to tighten the lug nuts, because I know we've all worked for people who, you know what I mean, are running around with their hair on fire, putting out fires, and you're thinking in your head, I sent you that email 5 days ago, and if you would have addressed the problem that I told you about 5 days ago, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I think not only do we all have to do it, I think we all see it happening constantly. And I think now that you brought this concept to people's minds, I think they're going to see it a lot more happening. So we can't talk about success, I think, without talking about failures. So I think, walk us through what you would consider the biggest failure in your career and what you learned from it.
Well, it's interesting. I think that, I'm going to take a little different approach on this, because it's not so much an individual thing that happened as a failure. I think it's a couple things that I learned along the way that were failures on my point not to recognize. So, for example, one of the things I think I early on in my career did not recognize as important as I should have is this whole concept of don't allow your strength to be your weakness. And so for me, my strength is, I'm high energy, enthusiastic, I get to the spot quickly, I think outside the box. Well, what are my weaknesses? High energy, enthusiastic, I get to the spot quick. And so what ends up happening then, and why I use that as the example of a failure, is because I didn't always recognize it. What ended up happening was I didn't recognize also, everything to me was so important. Everything was the same to me, right? I was going to do it 150%. I was going to be all in on everything I did. Well, what I learned the hard way and through some of the failures was that not everything is equal, right? So you have to understand the difference between nice to do things and need to do things. And the nice to do things are just that, they're nice to do. But there are times when you can't do them. Think about coming out of this difficult time, coming out of a pandemic. People like to do nice to do things. For example, you may be starting up your restaurant again, and you may be looking at your people saying, maybe what we need to do is repaint this restaurant and give it a different feel. Well, that's a nice to do thing, but maybe that's not the thing to do right now. Maybe the right thing to do is understand the safety protocols, make sure that we understand exactly how many people we can have in the restaurant, how do we do this as efficiently as we can, what's the right menu. Those are the need to do things. But the nice to do things we like to do. And there were times in my career that I didn't really, because I didn't understand the difference between my strength and weakness, everything was a need to do. And that's not necessarily true. And I think that led to some of the disappointments. Maybe I missed a business plan because, and I missed a promotion because I was focusing in on, all the things to do. And I just spread myself and my people so thin that we achieved less than we could have. And frankly, you put your people in a bad position, right? Your goal as a leader is to put your people in a position to be successful. Well, if I'm having them do things that may not be the need to do things, then I'm really not putting themselves or the business in a place to be successful. So I think that's so important. I think the second failure for me was you really have to understand that you can't let your highs get too highs and your lows get too low. Because in business and in life, you're going to have that emotional roller coaster. And if things are going really well, there's 3 times in everybody's career. One, it doesn't happen too often. Everything you touch turns to gold. It doesn't going to happen very often. When it happens, enjoy it, because it ain't going to happen much more, right? And then there's most of the time in your career where you're doing a good job, and you may get a promotion, you may be recognized for doing, but you're doing good. But then there's that 20% of the time where nothing you do works. You're not connecting with the manager or person you're working for. No matter how hard you try, you just never seem to connect. It's going to happen. Make sure that you do the best you can. You focus on the need to do things, not the nice to do things. You understand where that manager you're working for is coming from. Because when you're in that position, you're not hoping to be the next level. You're just hoping not to lose your job. And so I think that that's what's so important. And I think that what that really comes down to, you have to manage that. So you're going to manage. So when you're in that everything you touch turns to gold, don't be spiking the ball. Don't be over celebrating. You better start thinking about when the train starts to go down a little bit, where am I? How am I positioning myself? And I think more important for me was always recognizing that in the people in my care, right? When I saw someone who was working as hard as they could, but nothing seemed to work for them, that's when you give them a lifeline. You don't need to be the master of the obvious. Hey, by the way, you're really off plan, and this continues, you're not going to be able to, probably won't work there anymore. That's the master of the obvious. Nobody needs a master of the obvious as a leader. What they need is someone who hands them their lifeline. I can see you're committed. I've seen you're working hard. just nothing's clicking for you. It's like the baseball player who walks up. Some days it's like hitting a beach ball. Some days it's like a marble, and you're hitting it. You finally hit the ball, and it goes right to another fielder. So you're going to have those times. And so those, to me, were the two, I think, failures on my part, not recognizing that. Don't allow your strength to be your weakness. There's a difference between nice to do and need to do. And manage your emotions. Don't let your highs get too high and your lows get too low. And those things, because I didn't, led to sometimes disappointment, sometimes some failures in my performance. And I think back and I said, I could have managed that a little bit better.
Great. Let's move to a couple of our questions that people are asking in the chat box. So how does leading during the pandemic, when 100% of your workforce is working from home, differ from pre-pandemic times?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I think that's going to be so important going forward, because you're still going to have a certain percentage of your people working from home. And I think you really have to be more conscious of your ability to connect with them, right? They're going to want to know they're still part of something. And so it's going, there's going to be things that you just can't text people on, or you just can't assume that they understand. There's going to be those phone calls where you set aside time and say, hey, Nicole, you're doing a great job. I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. And that's when you're saying, hey, I want you to know I recognize you're doing a great job. So your ability to you're going to have to work on your communication skills. Communication skills are difficult for people to begin with, right? Most people struggle in that area. They're either very good one-on-one or they're good in a group. Most people aren't good in both. So you have to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are in terms of communication skills, and really focus that on how I'm going to improve those things, and then understand the communication that the people that are working from home need. Some people like the phone call. Some people like a text. Some people like, you get 2 or 3 of them on a phone Zoom call, and you give them that chance to feel like you're part of something. But you better check in with your people. You better check their pulse through the communication that you have with them, and you have to work on your communication skills, or you're going to lose some really good people. Just remember, people who leave your organization are usually your best people. The people who are struggling or aren't your best people, they're not looking for other jobs. It's the best people who leave, and you can't afford to lose your best people, because somewhere along this whole path of the pandemic and working from home, you missed an opportunity to stay connected with them and let them know how important they are inside your organization. So communication skills are going to be paramount in this.
I think a lot of leaders, too, would feel they need to micromanage in these times, stay more on top of their people because they're not physically putting eyes on them. Do you think that that is something that you've done, or do you think that that's not the best way to probably handle this pandemic?
Well, the first step is you have to, we talked about this and you mentioned this before, and I just want to talk about this a little bit further because it answers the question and maybe in a little different way. So this concept of empowerment, I think that what people don't understand is what empowerment means. Empowerment doesn't mean you treat people with dignity and respect. That's just good management, and that's the way you treat people. Empowerment means that you give people the authority that goes with the responsibility. Now, how do you know your people are empowered? And this will answer your question. Empowered people discipline themselves. That's how you know someone's empowered. They're disciplining themselves. Well, if they're disciplining themselves, it's like the old commercial years ago when the goalie let the puck in and the coach gave him a lifesaver, right? Well, if the goalie lets the puck in and he or she's banging the goal, you don't need to go over to them and say, hey, by the way, you got to stop the puck. Well, they're upset already. They're already empowered because they're disciplining themselves. Now, if you go over to the goalie and he says or she says, I can't believe it, the defense is terrible, I'm out here by myself. Well, they're not empowered. They're just finding excuses. So if you have individuals in your care who are already taking ownership and they're already disciplining themselves, you don't need to be the master of the obvious and overmanage them. You need to let them fly. You need to take that step back and let them be who they are. And I think that's what's so important. So I don't know if we have time, but let me give you a quick story. So my life lesson as an adult, right, since full disclosure, you told everybody you're my daughter, comes from your mom, my wife, Debbie, right? So one night we go out to dinner, and a person, the couple we're with, and we were just starting to meet them, and says to Debbie, so who's your favorite child? Is it Jean Marie? Is it Nicole? Is it Andrew? Is it Rocky? And so I kind of take a step back, and I want to see how she answers it, right, And so she says, well, I don't have a favorite. They're all my favorite. And the woman says to her, well, how could that be? And she says, because each of them gets what they need when they need it. Now think about that. I listened to her say that. I thought, how brilliant, how thoughtful, it says so much about her. But from that moment forward, that's how I managed. I managed that each person in my care got what they need when they needed it. So to answer your question, as you have all these people working from you remotely, you have to think about what each person needs. So for example, if I have a seasoned CFO, he or she doesn't need me to overmanage them. They know their job. They're excellent at it. They just need me to let them fly. So I may spend just a little bit of time with them. Other people could view that and say, I don't know if Rocky really likes that person. But they're thinking, this is great. He leaves me alone. He lets me do my job. I could have a brand new director of sales who needs me maybe to help close a deal with them, maybe go out and visit a customer, however we're doing it at that time, maybe remotely. Well, they may get 40% of my time. Someone could say, well, either A, he doesn't really like him, he's always with him, or B, that's from their view. But from that individual, they think they're getting exactly what they need. So as you think through this empowerment, you think through how you manage remote people, the key is each person should get what they need when they need it. And if you manage like that, or the way Mom managed, manage our family, everybody got what they need when they needed it. And that's made all of you feel like you were the special child. Well, that's what your employees or people in your care need to feel like. I get what I need when I need it. So therefore, I'm that special individual inside this organization.
That's great. Now, we have a question from a 2011 pharmacy grad. Work for a workers' compensation insurance company, first and only pharmacist in the company, but looking to expand his role or her role. What's your advice?
I would say one of the things to do is understand 3 questions about the company to start off with. Like, who are we as a company? What do we stand for as an organization? And what are the things that we won't compromise as a company? Because if you understand those 3 things about a company, the company that you work for, or what a company should do, then you can help them to grow and develop or become a larger part of the solution inside that company because you understand them, right? It's not your view of what they are. It's who is this company I work for? What do we stand for? And what are the things we won't compromise? And if you clearly understand the things they won't compromise, then when you're making solutions or you're thinking outside the box or you're thinking about how you can become a bigger part of the company, you're not in violation of what they won't compromise or, hey, wait a minute, that's something we would never do because of this, this, and this. So I think it's important to understand that. By the way, those are the 3 things I tell people when I get the opportunity to talk to graduates, graduating seniors or juniors or seniors in college or juniors or seniors in high school. Get to know that about yourself. What are those 3 things about me? Who am I as a person? Who am I as a leader? What do I stand for? And what are the things I won't compromise? Because that becomes your brand promise as a leader. So I would say to that individual with the question is understand that about your company. So as you're thinking of new ways, new innovative ways, new creative ways to help that organization, and you're going to do it in a way that fits the vision and strategy of the organization.
I think you should elaborate a little bit more on that idea of not compromising and talk about businesses you've seen that have compromised and it's been detrimental.
Well, go a little further than you think about the story of Wells Fargo, right? A company well over 100 years, and it's, building its brand, well-known brand. And clearly, if you walk through that organization, you would see, well-defined, who are we, right? Every cafeteria would have a poster of who are we? What do we stand for? Value, mission statements all over. But number 3 is the one that gets companies and people in trouble. What will we compromise? And I think that's so important in an organization. And as a leader, it's important. What are the things I won't compromise? Is it integrity? Is it safety? And you're going to get challenged on number 3. It's going to be that, well, okay, I'm missing my business plan. Am I rounding up instead of rounding down? Or do I look the other way when someone has a safety violation because it's not really that big a safety violation? As growing up, and if I see a UPS driver without a seatbelt on, which is rare, what would I do? I'd walk over, hey, how you doing? I say, how long you been with our company? Yeah. Hey, by the way, your seatbelt's not on. Now, I'm on vacation. Do I need to do that? Well, if I silently sanction bad behavior, that's the one thing a leader can never do. You're never allowed to silently sanction bad behavior. Well, if I see something that's not right, I have to address it, because then I just okayed it by someone saying, well, Rocky saw it, didn't say a word. So I think that you have to understand the answer to number 3. What are the things you won't compromise as an organization? And what are the things you won't compromise as a leader? And that's what gets companies in trouble all the time. They really haven't articulated and defined number 3. They believe at a high level, they may say it at a high level, but they're really got to be able to articulate it. And then when they get challenged, they got to make sure that they live by number 3. What are the things that won't compromise?
Another question we have that I think is such a great question is, how do I establish myself as a leader in the view of others? I might think that I'm a leader, but how do I let other people know that I'm a leader? How do I express that? How do they see that? What do I do?
Well, leadership's an interesting thing. You are the next level before you are the next level. So it's really about becoming comfortable in your own skin as a leader, right? And it's understanding that you're going to make mistakes. And you start to become that leader because of the things you do, the way you conduct yourself. I never walked in and said, hi, I'm the CEO. I just walked in, hey, Rocky Romanella, nice to meet you, right? And at some point, while you're in the meeting and you're answering questions or you're talking, people are like, who is that guy? Well, he's our CEO. Well, I think it's how you conduct yourself. It's the confidence with which you go about, interacting with people. And so obviously as you're new, you're learning that. But I think the key is, don't try to be something you're not. Be yourself. You'll grow into that position. And then what ends up happening is you start to get some wins. You start to feel good about yourself, and you start to look like that next level. And somebody says at some point, hey, how come Mary isn't the division manager? I thought she was already. Well, that's how you know somebody's ready. That's how you know you're ready. You are the next level before you are the next level. I never worried about getting to the next level. I always worried about, was I ready for the next level? It's funny, people would always ask me, like, for example, when I was running the supply chain, or, what keeps you up awake at night, right? And I used to always say, I'm always worried that one day they're going to figure out I'm the guy they promoted. And they're like, wait a minute, that's the guy we promoted? We didn't think that's who he was. So I think that you always have to have that little bit of, humbleness of, wait a second, I've always got to make sure I'm doing the best job I can and getting myself prepared. The rest will take care of itself.
Talk about that question that you often ask when you go into a company and they bring you in to basically help when things are chaotic and things aren't going right. That's what you do with 360 management. You're a business consultant. Talk to everybody about why you ask the leader of that company what keeps you up at night.
I always want to know what keeps somebody up awake at night, because most times it's never the obvious. It's never what you think. And I think that, they'll describe to you the obvious things. Well, we're not making our business plan, or we're not making our service isn't where it needs to be, or the quality of the products that we're producing aren't where they need to be. Those are the obvious things, right? Those aren't the problems. Those are just the results of the problem. So what's the true problem inside this organization? And when you ask that question, well, what keeps you up awake at night? What you end up finding out is, number one is, I'm not solving for what I think is keeping him up awake at night. And number two is, I really want them to tell me really what is the true problem here. And sometimes you'll find out that the true problem is, maybe it's the quality of the individuals inside the organization. Maybe it's their inability to, really understand their revenue and the type of revenue they're getting, and understanding, the different revenue streams that they're in right now. Maybe it's, it's a safety issue inside the organization. It's hard to retain top talent if you walk into an organization and their safety frequencies aren't world class. It's those things that keep somebody up awake that may not be as obvious as, hey, we're not hitting our business plan, or our profitability, we didn't hit our numbers this quarter, and, stock price is down, or we're in trouble. So I think it's important, because that becomes the aha moment for that leader. When you say to them, hey, what keeps you up awake at night? And now that's the vulnerability moment. That's when you as the leader are going to sit there and kind of have that meeting. Hi, I'm Rocky Romanella, and we're not doing this properly. And because we're not doing these things properly, it's resulting in these results, which are what everybody thinks is our obvious problem. But no, the reality is this here. It could be you haven't done a good job of succession planning, and so you don't have, I find when we work with a lot of small businesses, the number one problem is that third generation business. They've had a great history, but now junior doesn't want to take over anymore. They don't have a succession planning in place. So now what's going to happen? Are we going to sell the business to a larger company? Are we going to close the business? So by asking what keeps you up awake at night, what you find out by a small business owner who's had a generational business, they'll say to you, you know what really keeps you up awake at night? I don't think it's going to be a family business anymore going forward. Okay, well then that's really a succession planning problem, right? It's not really the problem of, quality or profitability. And so that's why I think that vulnerability and that aha moment by the person in charge or the organization you're working for really kind of puts things in a clearer vision of what the true problem really is.
And I know for me, I was recently at a job and I was just very unhappy and I couldn't pinpoint why I was unhappy. And I was up in the middle of the night and it clicked to me like what I hated about the job. And it wasn't what I thought I hated every day when I was there, but in the middle of the night, it occurred to me what I was anxious about. That was like, that's what I hate about this job. I knew it was never going to change, so I knew it was time for me to leave. Which brings me to my final question as we wrap up is, when is it time to leave and when is it time to stick it out?
So that's a great question. So, as Stacy said in the introduction, I had the opportunity to be at UPS for 36 years. What I can tell you is I didn't agree with everything that happened at UPS. I didn't disagree enough to leave. Why that's so important is because it's the answer to your question is I felt like I belonged at UPS. I felt like morally, ethically, culturally, I belonged there. Didn't mean I agreed with everything. Didn't mean that every day was a perfect day, but I felt like I belonged. So my answer to you would be, it's very similar to when we took you to colleges and you walked on the campus and you felt like, I belong here, right? And there was other schools you went to and you said, I don't belong here, right? Well, when you don't belong there, that's when those difficult days you say, well, I don't fit. I don't belong here morally, ethically, culturally. I felt like I fit at UPS. So therefore, I managed through some difficult times. I managed through some of the moves. I managed through some of the, times I thought maybe I should have got promoted, but didn't. But you managed through because you felt like you fit. As you're in an organization and you don't feel like you fit, it's no different than I shouldn't go to this school if I don't feel like I fit. It's that same feeling inside an organization. And that's why when companies have large turnover, they really need to take a step back. It's not about pay. It's not about benefits. Well, those things are important, and I think you should have great compensation packages and benefit packages. At the end of the day, when people leave, it's because they feel like they don't fit. They don't belong in this organization, and it's time for me to leave. And you got to ask yourself, how come I can't retain and recruit top talent? Why do they leave? It's because they don't feel like they fit.
That's great. Well, I think this was a great conversation. We're wrapping up. I feel like I've even learned things, and I've lived with you for 36 years. So before we go, why don't you just quickly tell everybody if they want more of your advice, want more of your anecdotes from your long tenured career, where they can get Tighten the Lug Nuts.
Well, thanks, Nick. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be on this call today, and you did a fantastic job. So as a dad, I'm very proud of you, and as a professional, you are the best. But I will say that St. John's is it's just great for me, and I think that it starts there, right? It starts with that family. It starts with that feeling that you belong, and so I felt like I belonged at St. John's. I know my daughter goes to Seton Hall, and she always felt like she belonged there. That's important, and so as a St. John alum, I'll help any way I can. We have a website, tightentheLugnuts.com. We do keynote speaking, leadership training. I am also right now, I feel like book clubs are a good opportunity for people to get together and do some training and development through a book club kind of setting virtually. And I will dial in and lead a discussion free of charge because I want to help any way I can from this training point. And as a fellow alum, if I can help in any way, or if you'd like to book sign, you could reach me at rockyromanella@gmail.com. On the website, I answer all the contact me information, and feel free to, if you want, contact me or give me a call, and I can help in any way. I absolutely will do that. But it's been a pleasure to be on this call today, and I want to thank Stacy for the invite.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And a very special thank you to Rocky and Nicole for such informative and engaging discussion. For their full bios, please go to stjohns.edu/CF webinars. Here you'll also find a schedule of upcoming webinars and past recordings. I hope you will join us Thursday, February 25th at 9 a.m., where we will continue our networking series and begin our 3-part session on building a resume. On the 25th, we will start by focusing on the objectives. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day. Thank you both.